Hello, everyone. We'll start. So, folks, today we are having our 22nd virtual meetup. Before starting, a huge shout out to Browser Stack, our exclusive sponsor for all our community events and premium sponsor for our conference.
Let me call on the stage.
Hey everyone, how's
Hi
everyone?
Sai, how are you?
Good, good, good. Thanks for having me, and I'm doing good. I was just
Perfect.
looking at the chat, so I'm also equally excited to share my experiences for this talk, and
Lovely,
also see what people can take away.
lovely. You can give us a brief intro about yourself and then we are good to go.
Yeah, fantastic. Hey, my name is Sai, and I work as a principal consultant at ThoughtWorks. And outside I do a lot of open source contribution. I'm quite passionate about it because when I started my career as a quality analyst, I've learned a lot from the community. So one way to give back to the community, I found my space as an open source way. So I do quite a lot of open source. I'm also a contributor to Appium, Selenium, and quite a lot of other open source projects. At the same time, I've also presented in a lot of conferences. We have been doing public speaking for the last at least 5, 6 years now, and I'm still continuing to look forward and really excited. Yeah, that's about me.
Perfect. Perfect.
So let me know if we are good to start. I'll probably share my screen then.
Yeah,
So today I'm going to talk or share my experiences about design patterns in test automation. So I'm going to share my experiences and not go through a lot of these design patterns. Right. To start off with a disclaimer here, I basically want to not go through all the 23, 24 design patterns that are there in programming, but rather I want to talk through some of the design patterns that I've used quite a lot of design patterns based on the problems. So I've only handpicked few of them, given the time over here. So I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and how these design patterns actually help me, right? So don't expect this talk to be a session where you can learn about design patterns, but definitely it will, you can understand how design patterns can come to rescue you in certain problems. And also another thing that I want to call out over here is you know design patterns are not your golden bullets. Okay, you're thinking that a design pattern can come and solve any problem, right? No, it is not. So always see only when you have a problem what kind of pattern can help you, but don't do the other way around where you wanted to implement a pattern and then hunt for the problem within your space, right? So don't do that space, right? Yeah. So how many of you have used design patterns in test automation code? I'm going to go out of this mode so that I could see the chat. Okay. How many of you have used design patterns in test automation? So I see a lot of yeses out there. So what kind of patterns that you have used? Anyone? People have told yes. At least I see like 4, 5 answers, right? Page factory is really not a pattern because the pattern got looped in because of selenium, right? Uh, so I really don't see that as a pattern. If there was no, so we see it very tightly coupled to the front end world, right? And then even the front end tech started moving like multi pages to a single page and things, right? So let's see what are the patterns that we can see. Build a pattern, I can see factory design patterns. Again, I see a POM singleton pattern. Okay, we see quite a few patterns, right? Yeah, singleton pattern, builder pattern, factory pattern. So commonly used are builders and factories and things, right? Okay, cool. So some of the patterns we have seen what you have typically used, right? I'm going to start off with the problem statement. So I picked one of the problems which have come through where when I wanted to build you know, a test automation framework, which is a cross-platform. It has to be cross-platform, meaning we had to support Android, iOS, as well as web. And at the end goal, the product that we were wanting to build was, had a similar functionality for both iOS, Android, as well as web. And in that space, they were, I would say, roughly about 80-90% of the features were same, and probably 10% was slightly getting deviated because of platform specific, right? Certain things what you do in a web you can't do in mobile, and what you do in Android you can't do in iOS. Or even it could be very specific to platforms, like maybe in Android you could probably to get to a specific screen you need to do probably swipe right. Maybe in Android you don't have that functionality, maybe you need to go through, probably in iOS you have to go through hamburger menu and things like that, right? So there could be a slightly design changes or workflow changes, right? And also it was just not the front end, but also there were API automation to it, right? There was back end scope as well. I'm not jumping into a lot of these test pyramid as of today to see, when you talk about API, how should we do it in integration or unit and stuff. So I'm going to slightly keep it above, top of the pyramid. So, and also, the framework which was focused was persona driven. So more like you see in any of these e-commerce websites, right? Typically, there would be a seller, there could be a buyer. So each persona, when they log in, they have certain functionalities exposed to them, right? So when we thought, when all of this was a requirement to build this framework, we wanted to look through what's the right way to build this entire walking skeleton, right? Because we don't want to, like, churn out something and then look through there's a problem and then change, because there was some, we knew how the product was actually going to evolve, right? First we're going to build for web and Android, and definitely there's going to be iOS down the lane. So we knew how the product is going to get evolved, and this was a problem statement that we really thought how we have to build this framework, right? And for the next at least 30-40 minutes, right, we're going to look through a lot of code samples, and see how, what was the problem, and how we want to evolve out of it, and how certain patterns actually came and rescued, right? So I'll quickly jump into IDE. So let me know if you could see IntelliJ comfortably. Yes, no, probably someone has to unmute, probably from the host. Anyone? Okay, now I need to go
Yes.
back to the chat there. And okay, people can see. Cool. So if you look through over here, right, I've just created a very simple JavaScript API test. All that it does is it basically arranges your endpoints, and it acts, meaning it gets a request. It's just making a simple get request for you, and we are basically trying to assert what is out of it, right? Which is very very simple. I'm not going into the details of API automation of the thing. So ideally I wanted to sketch this AAA aspect of arrange, act, and assert. And if you look through, the way I really always plan when I want to put down a framework is, the first thing I want to really focus is a single responsibility, right? So make sure that each of your classes hold only one responsibility, and don't, like, mix up too many responsibilities into one, right? So keeping that in head, if you see, I've created an API driver, and basically what this API driver does is, no, I've actually used something called as Axios. So Axios is nothing but a Node.js client, similar to the last session we were talking about REST assured, right? REST assured is again a client for you. So similar way, Axios is nothing but a Node.js HTTP client, which can help you make API calls, right? Like get, post, delete, put, or whatever it could be, right? Get your responses and stuff. So I'm using Axios over here, and all that the specific class is basically doing is it's managing the driver for you, which is nothing but your API driver, right? So all that it does is it's trying to make a request. So if you see over here, the responsibility of this class is only to make a request, and it's only coupled with Axios, right? And you could ask me, hey, why do you want to do this, right? I mean, what is the benefit that you get out of this? So let's say tomorrow, I've seen this pattern with my previous experiences, right? You start off with a certain client, but as you keep evolving in your project, and you bump into a situation where, one of these, one of these tools don't help you, but there's another tool which can help you solve the problem, right? Then what happens is, you go ahead and change certain clients and certain libraries, and it's like a haywire for you, because you would have used it in so many places in your framework, so you don't have that leverage, right? So in my case, if I isolate this entire driver creation into an abstracted layer over here, now what happens is tomorrow, even if it's not Axios, if I want to move to any other client library, let's say like maybe super test, or maybe a node fetch, or maybe frisbee or chakra, anything, right? I can just change in one space, and you don't have to touch base your entire framework, right? I get that leverage by abstracting that out. And the next is all that I want to do is I've created a fetch class which simply makes an API request, irrespective whether it's a get, put, post, or whatever, right? And if it's a successful request, it just returns the response. If not, it simply catches up your error and throws the error out for you, right? Because you definitely want to fail when a request is not being made. So again, over here, if you see, I'm still looking at a single responsibility principle, because this all the responsibility of this class is clearly only making a request, and nothing more than that, right? So with this, now what happens is, yeah, I make a request, I make a get call to it, right? And this typically gets into the same class where you saw into fetch. It's making a request. If it is success, it's just going to return me a response, and we validate the response, right? A very simple example that I've taken over here. And let's say this is probably a question that I want to put, right? I'm sure that a lot of you would have faced in your projects where certain async systems are into place, right? Let's say an event-driven system. When I say async, a event-driven system like Kafka comes into play, where an event is being inserted, and probably it takes a while for the event, right? So when you immediately say a get, you not get a response because the data wouldn't have reflected because of the event still, you know, the event still hasn't arrived for you, right? So in these cases, right, again, a question to the group, I'm looking at the chat, is what would you do over here? So you made a get call, you want a response, but you know that the event has not arrived for you, and what would you do in this case? Anyone? Uh, okay, await. So Aditya, when you mean to say await, you are basically waiting for a response, right? Ah, yes, okay. Anyone else? So Aditya says that you basically wait for the response. So to wait for a response, Aditya, what would we do actually? So basically, I'm going to make a get call. So I'm expecting for a certain response. I know it's an event-driven system. It's going to take, let's say, about few seconds, right? Let's say a few milliseconds we can take. And with this few milliseconds, when you make an immediate get, you will not get. Okay, Mohammed says probably sleep for 2 seconds, and also poll again, right? So handle responses, async await timeouts. How about having a conditional wait? Okay, so everyone's talking collectively about polling, right? Okay, now looking at the code base again, right? So this is the one which makes the request, right, for me. So where should I add this polling? Now probably you can tell which line number, or is it inside this class called fetch? Anyone? Okay, I'll show the code base again. Should I do, should we, where should we apply this entire polling mechanism, right? Should it be in line number 9 in the fetch class, or should it be somewhere in line number 12 within your test? So inside make request. So Irfan says it's inside make request, right? Okay. Anyone else? In line number 12. So Jitin says that, hey, we can do it in line number 12 itself. So within the test, right? Okay. So basically, you're saying wrap this entire thing inside like whatever the code that we're going to write to poll. And also Jitin said make it inside this, right? Anyone else? Any other? Okay, if it applies to that API call in general, it should be in the fetch class itself. Hide it inside the test class. So we're getting a combination of answers saying people are saying inside the test class or inside the fetch class, right? So I wouldn't want to do it inside the test class because it breaks my readability, right? I mean, I don't want my test to tell, I'm trying to retry for a response or no. My intent of the test is only to say that I want to get a response, right? So I definitely don't want to do it there. But yes, you can do it inside the fetch class, right? So what would happen generally? Just correct me over here, people. I'm going to come back to the chat. So you're saying that I'm inside the fetch class. So what we will typically do is, write probably write a code, write a code to poll for a response, right? Basically, here, right? So this is what typically you would want to do. I mean, that's what I infer from whatever folks are telling in the chat, right? So I'm going back to the chat to relook into it. Is that what you meant? Like get into this make request class and probably write some polling code over here, right? Wrap this entire thing inside a polling, right? This is what people are referring to, right? People who said write it inside the make class. Okay, so I see one yes. Yeah. So you know what? I mean, your answer is correct. Ideally, this should be the right place for us to put, right? But I wouldn't want to do that here. I'll tell you why. Because like I said a few minutes back, if I try to add a polling logic within the fetch, I'm actually breaking one of the principles of single responsibilities, right? So now this class is taking up two responsibilities. The class is ideally taking a responsibility of making an API call. At the same time, it has also got a logic of entire polling, right? But I don't want to do that because it breaks my single responsibility principle, right? One of the design principles, over here is being broken. So I really don't want to get in there and change. But at the same time, I really don't want to do it in the test class. Also, the reason being is you break the reusability angle, right? Probably another test also needs this. So you also break the reusability space over here. So given this, what else could be an approach? So definitely we need to put the polling, but it has to be inside the make request, but I don't want to make the changes, right? So in this case, I really want to get into an approach called as a decorative pattern, right? What basically this decorative pattern does is it's similar to how you decorate a cake, right? You have a base, and then once you create the base, based on the flavors, then you apply a cream, right? Then you apply toppings, and that's how you build an entire cake, right? So you keep decorating it with sprinklers and things. A similar way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to decorate the fetch API class with the polling, right? So I'm going to simply say polling, and I'm going to you know inject the new fetch object, and I'm also this basically the polling class. I'll show you what the code is, and it basically tells, okay, I want to poll for like say 30 seconds, right? Now you know what happened over here. I'm not making any changes to my make request call. So which means, I'm still maintaining the single responsibility. At the same time, if you see what I've done to the fetch class, right over here, the new fetch, what you see over here, this entire space, right, is basically, uh, there's one principle that we need to follow is open close principles, right? So your test should be open for extension and closed for modifications. That's exactly what we did. We haven't modified any existing code base, but we only extended from it, right? I just wrapped a new polling class to it, right? And why you have to do this? What benefits do you get by ideally doing this, right? by by applying this entire open close principle, what we do is you're basically decorating it over here, right? This is a decorative pattern. I've decorated the new fetch class with the new polling method, right? So basically we try to introduce these kind of decorative patterns. The main reason is being because there's always a safety net over here, right? Because you know for sure that your code with just the new fetch and a make API call was working. If you go make any changes to the existing code base, you're still not too sure, right? Because something might break, you're not very confident. But in this case, you're only decorating. Your code still remains the same. You're not made changes to your existing functions, right? That's the kind of advantage what you get over here by doing this decorative pattern, right? And you can keep decorating as much as possible, right? I'll show you how this polling class would look like now. So you see my polling class, right? It basically has a constructor and it takes an API component, which is nothing but the fetch, right? So the fetch component is a part of it now. So, a simple retry mechanism. And if you see the make request, right? This API component has got an object of the new fetch, and this new fetch will basically come from your fetch class. So which is still making an API call for you, but we are wrapping it, with a decorative space. And you can keep decorating this as much as possible, right? So I've also bumped into this one another situation where, for some of the projects, you need some specific logging mechanisms, right? because there are audits and compliances where even for a non-prod environments, you have to track certain logging when you run these tests as an evidence for you to deploy to a higher environment, right? Anyone in the group have been in that kind of ecosystem where even lower environments you need to provide proofs to deploy to higher environments, like probably you're staging to an UAT, so you need some evidences of these logs and stuff. Anyone over here in this? Okay. So I see it is not right. Okay. So now what happens is in those cases, right? For certain environments, you basically probably will have a Grafana because it's free, open sourced, and maybe for higher environments, you might have like AWS, CloudWatch, and stuff, right? So you can also wrap your tests based on your environments to see what kind of logging mechanisms you want to do, right? So you can again wrap this into another decorator. Probably in my case, I'm going to call it wrap it with Kibana. Right? So now what happens is now this Kibana, the Kibana class is basically, so this Kibana class is again going to be a decorator on top of the polling mechanism, right? So with this, right, we have basically looked into basically looked at four things, right? One is single responsibility principle. Another one is composition over inheritance, right? Because the decorators are composed with your base API components, which we just saw like a fetch, right? And the reason using composition rather than relying on inheritance, right? This promotes a lot of code reusability, right? And at the same time, it avoids complexities with multiple inheritance and nested inheritances and things like that, right? So see through when there is a scope, always see if a decorative pattern can help you have your existing functionalities and keep extending to it, right? So that's a good stuff to think through. And this also has this open close principle, right? Your test is open for extension but closed for modifications. That gives you that safety net to make the code open, and you're just extending it, right? So that you don't have to worry that, hey, I've made some changes, I don't know if my framework is going to still run, or do I have to do a dry run then see if things are fine, right? So you don't have to bump into these kind of issues. Okay. uh, the next thing that I want to show is another pattern that I'm going to take through, right? Another problem that we saw when I was talking about my stuff is, between my Android and iOS and web compatibilities, right? So, it has to be cross-platform as well. So, but my test has to be same. So, I've again created a very simple example, and this time I'm going to take Java. So, you might see flavors of, programming languages. I'm going to keep switching, right? So, for this, we saw definitely, uh, you know, uh, a JavaScript. So, I'm going to move into Java now. Right? So in this space, right? So I'm going to talk about this pattern called as a factory pattern, how it basically helped to rescue me, right? So I've created this interface called execution, right? And basically this interface, for example, I've taken a simple example for a login and logout, because again, this would ideally, change between, iOS, Android. Probably for an Android, it could be very simple, like you key in your username, password, and just click on login. But whereas for an iOS, you need to send an activation link or things like that, right? So it would basically differ for you from case to case. So in this space, right, I've just created an interface saying execution, and it's just got two functions for me, right? So I would eventually create a class called an Android flow and a class called a web flow for me over here. And basically what they do is they implement their interface called execution, and I'll actually write all my logics on how I want to log in and log out for a web flow, as well as how I want to log in and log out for a Android flow, right? So if you see both of these classes being, an Android flow or web flow, would typically implement the same functionality, which is login. In both the platforms, I want to log in, but I want to log in slightly different, right? Because in my Android space, I probably want to do something more actually, right? So I want to do something more. But in my web world, all that I need to do is just one line, right? I just want to just click on a button and it just logs in for me. And the next thing is, now how do I know which of these classes should get executed, right? So let's say if I'm running on my web flow, how do I tell my test that it has to execute the login flow, or it has to execute the logout flow, right? So what I want to do in that case is I'm going to create another class. Let's close all the other tabs. Oops, right. So I'm going to create a factory class over here, which basically decides on runtime, right? On runtime based on your probably your environment variable or your driver creation. It's going to tell that whether it's an Android flow or an iOS flow or a web flow, right? So in this case, if the platform is simply an Android, it will just return, it will just create an object for you of an Android flow, and it's going to return to your test, right? And my test basically would simply, look like this for you. You create an instance of the factory, the view factory, and you say based on the driver from your environment or from your runtime, you just tell whatever is your driver, you give it the platform, and this basically returns an object which is created, whether it's an Android flow or an iOS flow, right? In this case, if you see, all that I'd simply do is test execute with login and logout. And now, if my object creation has resulted in an Android flow, this login would typically actually get into my Android flow, and it'll execute this for me. Right? And if it's in web flow, it would basically get into the web flows login, and it'll execute this functionality. So this way, what happens tomorrow, even well, like I said, right, I know for sure that, you know, I'm going to have iOS platform test coming into the game slowly, right? All that I need to do is when that comes in, I simply add another condition based on my platform and create my flows. Your test would eventually still remain the same. There is no changes to your test over here, right? And if you look through this, right, again we are adhering to two of these principles. One is single responsibility principle, where for Android flow you're actually having your Android classes, and whereas for iOS flow you're basically having all your iOS properties, all your iOS functions, and whereas the similar for your web as well, right? So we are definitely maintaining a single responsibility principle, and also of course our open close principle, right? And I'm going to just give a pause to, I'm going to go back to the chat to see if anyone's got anything more to like follow back. Okay, it's just more of a very healthy discussion happening. So, I'm not going to jump into that. So I'll probably move in further into the next problem or the next pattern that I really want to share with you folks, right? And the next thing, so we saw Java, right? We saw JavaScript, we saw Java. The reason for me to, show you, flavors of these programming languages is the reason being because when you want to implement a design pattern, right, it's language neutral, right? A design pattern can be implemented at any level in your test or at any space, right? It need not only be in Selenium world or a WebDriver world or a Cypress or a Playwright. It can also be in your API test. It can be in your integration tests and things, right? Probably people sometimes when I talk about these patterns and problems, right? People ask me like, hey, how do you bump into a problem where a certain pattern should be used, right? A best way that I've always seen is I used to take a problem and sit with a developer, pair with a developer, or pair with another QA, right? And have a chat to see, hey, I have this problem, but I can write my code in this way, right? If I don't put in a lot of, if I start putting in a lot of if else conditions to solve my Android iOS part, but my code doesn't look good, right? In one place it's fine. I'm not saying if else's are bad, but in one place it's good, but across your test framework, that itself is a code smell, right? Because you want to, let's say when iOS comes into play, you need to go change in so many places, right? Eventually. So, I typically said, and I say that, this is a workable code, but probably is not the best code, right? Uh, I shouldn't say it's a best code. Probably I can say it's not a good code, right? Because there is nothing best, but probably I would say things can be good based on your context and your problems, right? So I don't, that's where I don't say it's a best practice. It's a good practice. Look for a good practice which fits in your problem, right, within your context. So always look in that angle is what I would say. And that's how I sit with the developers, pair with the developers, pair with another QA to figure out what could be the best way. And that's how I also get introduced to these kind of design patterns as well. Maybe when I talk about design patterns, a very good book to read if people want to explore design patterns is there's this book called Head First Design Pattern. Maybe that's a very good book to understand about design patterns, read about it, and see what it can really solve and where and how you can implement it. Right? The book is called Good First Design Pattern. Okay, okay. Jumping into our the next pattern. So you know another problem when I was looking through is I'm probably asking the crowd again. Okay, I'm going and looking into the chat here. How many of you have seen this, right, when you were trying to automate? How many of you would have bumped into this? So generally when we look through a retail website, right, and you might have a payment gateway, right? And I knew that initially when my application was getting to build, the initial payment gateway that we really wanted to support was mostly PayPal and credit card, right? And slowly looking at the product, uh, how it will grow, so we knew in the backlog there are going to be other payment strategies as well, like online banking, or probably there's going to be an UPI in game, and things like. So how many of you have bumped into this situation where you also need to automate your entire checkout flow where there are different payment gateways for you? Anyone? I'm looking at the chat just to see if anyone's bumped into that. If you say yes, just tell me then how you have done it, right? Was there any pattern that you have followed, or how? Okay, I still don't see answers, so I'm still thinking that okay, maybe you didn't bump into it, or you bumped into it and probably uh, you know you have not automated it. I'm audible, right? I'm not. Okay, I guess a thumbs up. Okay, okay. So Rama says it's a kind of a factory pattern. Okay, anyone else? Okay, cool. I'll jump into it, right? So I had this space where typically wanted to implement, you know, a suite which can take, multiple strategies, because we had credit cards, debit cards, PayPal, and what used to happen was, you know some of these payment methods, some had OTP validations, some had different, some had no validations, right? Like basically a credit card had OTP validation, but PayPal didn't have an OTP validation, and a debit had a different kind of a validation, probably a push notification into your banking apps and things, right? So you could have thought about automating it by simply writing a lot of again, a conditional basis, right? You somehow tell from your test that, "Oh, I'm going to do a pass it a string saying it's a credit card payment." So you would say if the string is a credit card, probably that's also one way to do, right? But we're talking more on uh, principles, and seeing how we can fit in the right pattern into place to solve this problem, right? So the next thing that I'm going to take is I've taken Python over here, a simple example with Python, and I've just built up a simple test. I'm not really a Python guy, but I thought I should bring that flavor of programming language to show, right? So again, this is a simple WebDriver code, a Selenium WebDriver code, right? We saw JavaScript, and now in Python, I've actually pulled out a simple WebDriver code base over here. So if you look through here, what I've done is a simple payment strategy class, right? Sorry, a simple payment strategy interface, which just talks about what kind of payment that you want to do, right? Select the payment type, and you complete the payment. You basically want to select whether it's a credit card payment or a debit card payment or a PayPal, and then you complete your payment, right? Okay. And then I created another class which specifically spoke only about the credit card payment strategy. Okay. So if you look through this, this only talks about the entire credit card payment strategy, right? And what it does basically over here is it implements your sorry, it basically implements your payment strategy interface, so that you have your select payment method, and also you have your complete method. And if you see in the select payment method, we're just simply doing a driver dot find by an ID of a credit card option, and we're doing a click. And one thing to observe in the credit card payment, we also have OTP and you submit on it, right? So there's a slight variation in your flow when you talk about, a complete payment method. And then a similar thing, I have another class which again implements, payment strategy. Okay, and we have a payment method, and also we are implementing the complete payment. And this case, if you see, we actually don't have any of these OTP related stuff over here, right? Because for a PayPal you don't need it, but for a credit card you definitely need an OTP validation to be for the payment to get processed, right? So we have two different a payment classes here. One is a PayPal and one is credit card, right? So I've abstracted all these logics out completely. And if you look through, I have a context over here which says, I just want to complete a payment, right? I've created an abstracted class which says checkout process, right? In my test, I simply want to say check out the process, and that checkout process basically, is going to have a method called complete checkout, and it's going to implement, both the select payment method and the complete method, and it's just sending out the driver, right? Now, by doing this, right, now how your test would eventually look like is something like this. So if I want to simulate a retail checkout process for a credit card, I simply send my credit card strategy into the checkout process, right? So what basically is happening over here in this space, right? In this entire space. Okay, let me highlight it better. So what basically is happening over here, right? Is basically, you see, we are injecting the credit card payment object into the checkout process, and we are simply calling the complete checkout, right? And this is where I'm looking at something called as interface segregation principle, right? Always make sure that your test should not rely on low level implementations, but it should only rely on high level abstract. It should only rely on abstracted layers for you. It should not rely, or it should not depend on your low level implementation, right? And this is where, when you implement you know a strategy which is called as a strategy, basically it's a strategy pattern, right? You're strategizing within your test to say whether you want to do a payment, a credit card payment strategy, or you want to do a PayPal strategy, right? So if you look through this, if I want to do a PayPal, all that I simply do is I'm only creating an object over here, uh, right? I'm only creating a PayPal strategy and I'm injecting it into the checkout process, right? So basically, it's nothing but a DI. I'm just doing a dependency injection of my PayPal payment to the checkout process, and things will just flow for me, right? A similar thing when I want to do for a UPI, I simply do an UPI strategy, and everything still remains the same for me, right? And I've just taken this as a Python example, right? If you jump into your Java world, and if you are using like JUnit or TestNG runners, you would eventually do a parameterized object where you can only send these credit card payment strategies or PayPal pay strategies and UPI strategies, right? Which it'll be one test which can just run it for all these strategies for you, right? And this again fits into your single responsibility, because your credit card payment strategies is just got its own responsibility to do credit card payments like OTPs and clicks and things like that. And also dependency inversion principle is being taken care over here, right? Because like you see, a PayPal is being injected into your checkout process, right? An object of your PayPal has been injected, an object of your UPI payment has been injected into your checkout process. And definitely this also adheres to our open close principle again, right? And if you look through this, your test is open for extension but it's closed for modification, right? And that's where we are able to implement a lot of these strategies, like a credit card payment strategy, a PayPal strategy, and a UPI strategy, right? So with that, I'm just doing a quick time check. How many more minutes do we have, Shashank? How many minutes left, Shashank? Okay, 20 minutes. Cool, thanks. Uh, and like when I saw the chat initially, right, a lot of them said, hey, you know what? There are some patterns like POM, and some of you told about factory pattern, and some of you actually, also told about, builder pattern, right? Yes, Builder is another pattern which I want to share. Like most of you are already aware of builder pattern. I'll just touch base on the builder pattern. Also show an example because not everyone in the group said, hey, we have worked on patterns. Right? Some of you also might be here to, explore these kind of patterns. So again, I'm going to switch to another programming language, which we already used, which is nothing but my JavaScript, right? So if you look through this, right, I'm going to again ask a question to the group. So a simple class which has got a product list and it's got a constructor. You basically inject the product name, the quantity and the price, right? Because we're just still in the retail world we're talking. And I'm going to basically calculate the total. Right? So I'm again going to use a driver dot find element. I'm going to send this product values into it. So, and the way my basic test would look like is, hey, within your test, you would create a product object and then you would inject, right? So, do you see any problem in this pattern? I mean, the way this is implemented, right, in line number 15, do you folks see there's any issues in this? And again, I'll just give you seconds for you to look through the code and I'll jump into the chat to see if you have something to say. Okay, anyone? I still don't see anyone. Okay. So there's a new product list, right? So it's taking three arguments. One is a product name, a quantity, and a price. So do you see any problem in this? Probably not now. Maybe when your product is evolving, what can you picturize, right? What are the issues that you can bump into? Yeah, Akshay is saying if the number of parameters increase, it might not be very readable, correct? What if there are more parameters, correct? Anyone else? Yeah, I'm going to stick to what Akshay and Rama mentioned is yes, if there are more attributes to added to this, right? Something like you know a description. So one is this constructor keeps growing, right? Yeah, it keeps growing, right, for me. So your brand and things, right? So this keeps growing now for me, right? When this keeps growing, what happens is one is you break the readability, of course, like for folks told in the chat. There's also another problem, right? I mean, we might end up doing, getting into human errors, right? Because you have to know the first one is a product name, a second one is a quantity, third one is a price, right? Or a fourth one is a brand, a category, and things, right? And now what happens is when generally we do our testing, right? We might not want to, you know, test. Sorry, I'll put it this way, right? We might want to test only with certain attributes and may not be with few, right? In those cases, what happens is you can't skip any of these attributes if you do it in this fashion. And with this, having these kind of more arguments into your constructor, your class itself is a code smell for you, right? That itself is a code smell. So how do we want to break this pattern, right? And that's where a builder pattern comes into rescue, right? So what basically we would want to do with the builder pattern is simply I've created a test object, a builder over here, which takes a constructor. Okay. And basically it's a getter and setter, right? And I'm sure that even in the previous rest assured session, when when I came in late, I saw a lot of chats talking about Lombok and getting and you're setting it and things. Right? A similar fashion that I've done over here is basically it's you're setting and you're getting it, right? So if you see, we are basically setting all that what we need, and we are actually building the entire product list, right? And when I'm building over here, we are sending it as an object, right? We're not sending as an argument, we're sending it as an object over here, right? Now what happens when typically you put it into these kind of builder pattern, right? So I'll show you the implementations of this, how it could be. You could choose to build your test data either with a quantity or without a quantity, or with a price or without a price. Or you want to add more attributes to it, you can still add more attributes to it, right? I've just done three of them over here. So you could also do as many as based on how you want to build your test object, right? And what basically then we can do is, and you see once this is actually built, it is actually injecting all of the data that you basically set for quantity, set for your product and your price, right? And if these values are not there, it would simply default to some values. And if there's nothing in the default, it would just be simply undefined for you, right? As simple as that for you. And this way, you know, what are we actually achieving in this entire build a pattern, right? For us is basically it's an open close principle again, where your builder is open for extension, right? It's closed for modifications. You can, let's say, initially you build it only with quantity, and again you go with price, right? So you're extending your builder. And it's also got this dependency inversion principle, because you are basically injecting your entire test object into your test classes, so that these can be used in your entire journeys, right? So yeah, so this is what I typically wanted to show for most of these kind of patterns. And I just handpicked few of these patterns based on the my experience which I've seen, right? So let's jump into jump in and very quickly do a refresh of what we have done, right? When we saw the decorative pattern, we basically looked at dependency inversion, single responsibility principle, composition over inheritances, and open close principle, right? And in the factory pattern, what we achieved is basically single responsibility principle and the open close principle. And the strategy pattern was more of this credit card, PayPal payments, and stuff which we saw. There were four things that we really hit was interface segregation principle. That's where I was talking about your low level implementation. Your test should not depend on low level implementations, but rely on abstractions. A single responsibility principle, because it was holding its, like, credit card payment had its own responsibilities and things, right? Dependency inversion and open close principle. And the last one, of course, we just saw was a builder pattern, right, for us. So the advantages of the patterns in test automation, if you look through, is reusability, right? So basically, design patterns promote code reusability, by encapsulating common testing techniques and best practices within these patterns, right? You can apply them across multiple classes, reducing duplication and effort as well. And like I said, language neutral, right? That was my idea, to show how these patterns can be implemented in any of these programming languages. They're not tied to a specific tool, nor a language. It can be across any of these programming languages. And separation of concern, right? When we talk about the separation of concern, see, design patterns encourages separations of concerns in a test code, right? For example, someone spoke about page object, right? So I'll take that example just to see the separation of concern, right? So the page object pattern separates your UI interactions from your test logics, from your locators, right? And it also makes it easier for you to update test when a specific UI locator change or UI component change and things like that. That could be one example. And sorry, right? And the next thing is about code quality, right? Patterns often lead to better code quality as they encourage uh, again, I'm saying not best practices but good practices, right? Such as modularity, encapsulation, and also use well defined interfaces, right? Don't have you know huge interfaces. Like, break your interfaces into tiny ones, and they should only be responsible if you really want to implement, right? I've bumped into some code bases, right, where you have interfaces, you implement it, and you don't really need them, and then you will simply add a sys out, or you would want to throw if someone is using them to say, this method is not implemented, or this method is not a part of this. You would ideally do some kind of those kind of logging, right? So try to avoid that. And because this can really result in more readable, reliable, and robust tests for you. Okay. And uh, and also ease of training, right, which is very very important, which I've seen people really don't give importance to, is when your new team member joins, when you give your entire test code base, right, that person should be able to establish or understand what exactly your domain is doing, what your tests are doing, what is your application doing, right? So this way you can enable a newcomer in your team as well. And that's also like a KT, right, where even they can write a good effective test, as well as they'll know what your application is doing. How many of you have really thought about this ease of training, right? Thinking that hey, you know what, I'll just give my test to my new team member, and that person should be able to understand what my domain, what my application is basically doing. Anyone? Anyone have done that? Yes, no? I'm just scrolling up and down to see. Okay, Aditya says yes, so that, which is very good, right? So always think through when you have your test, write it in such a way that it should actually, it should basically enable someone there, right? Cool. And what did we infer till now? We we spoke about a lot of these principles, right? Basically, I was only touch basing on one design principle called as solid, and where S stands for single responsibilities, O for open close principle, and Liskov substitution principle, interface segregation and dependency, right? With basically I was sticking to this entire solid principles when I was talking through all of these design patterns. You might, for a problem when you use a design pattern, it might not complete your solid, but it can actually always think through what you can fit in from the solid to make your when you design your test framework, right? And what I want to conclude here is your design patterns can be used across languages, across platforms. They don't only fit for APIs or units or integrations. You can also think through when you have an Android, iOS platforms, they can also fit in those kind of platforms. It can be in the web world, it can be in the API world, it can also be at an integration level, right? Meaning a very, very low level of the pyramid. So it can fit in at any level. And that's what I really want to conclude over here. And thank you so much for your time. I hope there was some learning out of this. Anything apart from the questions you want to ask me with regards to this, I'm happy as well.
Yes, we got one question.
Okay, how do we decide whether I need to follow writing test by creating an action class and executing test from Google Sheets, or creating a test class for each module and write test in it? Bharat, what do you mean by writing tests by creating a an executing test from Google Sheet? Like, is it more like a hybrid framework you're talking about, like from an Excel that you're moving keyword driven? Um, I mean, I would say the last keyword driven that I typically worked was probably 10 years back. Uh, right. And they break all the principles that we are talking about, right? Keeping them in Excel and things. So I'm not really a fan of this keyword driven because it it really is not helping in any of the ways that I was just talking about, for the last 40-45 minutes. Any book on mobile automation? Um, I I can't remember that book on just top of my head, but I know there's one book which was written by one of our Selenium users. I can't find that book. Okay, which framework would you suggest? Okay, Bharat, like I again said, right? There's I wouldn't say this is the right framework for you to use. Based on your context, you need to think through how you want to design, right? So if you look through all the patterns that we are talking about over here, right? These patterns can also be used when you're using a keyword driven, right? It can also be used in your page objects, right? Or so it can also be used in any of the frameworks that you really want to build, right? So whenever I build my framework, I look through my domain. I basically build my framework based on my domain itself completely, right? How my domain is, I break them into domain spaces, and then I typically write my test, build my suite based on that. So always see what your problem is and see what could fit into it. Is it written by Jonathan Lips? No, I don't think there's any book by J Lips on mobile automation. It was someone else, but I'll if I find it, I'll definitely post it. Um, Anything else? Okay, I don't see any other questions. Okay.
Any question, folks?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, sir.
And stay
Yeah,
safe. Thank you so much.
yeah,
Bye.
yeah. Bye bye.
Bye
Have
bye.
a decent day.
Thank you.